I'm dropping off my two kids with you. You're not doing anything anyway. I'm going to Paris for Fashion Week. My brother shouted, like he was handing me a trophy and not a punchline. They always laughed when he said things like that. Mom clicked her tongue the way she always did when she wanted me to feel smaller. My phone buzzed in my lap while sunlight from the living room window painted the scar on my shin a pale, stubborn pink. I was still relearning how to walk without pretending nothing had happened. I smiled into the silence and hung up the phone. Hi everyone, my name is Maya Sinclair. I'm 29. Do you ever notice how the world assumes the wounded are harmless? The house smelled like antiseptic and cinnamon, two things that did not belong together, except when your family insisted on making every wound into a holiday decoration. I could hear the muffled laughter from the kitchen, plates clinking like a metronome counting out the parts of my life they thought disposable. My bed was a small island of bandages and chipped paint. My walker leaned like a forgotten prop by the doorway. Outside, December rain glossed the street. Inside, their voices glittered over me like broken tinsel. He thought it was a favor. He thought I'd be grateful. 2 kids, he said, as if children were parcels and as if my days had nothing in them but waiting. Paris. Fashion Week. A caption, a story, an alibi neatly wrapped in champagne and flights. He didn't see the way my hands trembled reaching for the remote, how my ribs flinched at the sound of the front door. He didn't hear the small, private inventory I kept of everything he owed me, the years he borrowed my notes, the nights he slept in my spare room while I studied, the time he asked me to take care of the dog for just the weekend, and then never came back. I set the kettle on anyway. It hissed like a small, defiant engine. I made cocoa and poured it into my mother's teacup, the one with the tiny blue crack she always hid from guests. I sat so the light hit my face a certain way, practiced the angle that said I'm fine better than any lie. I tucked the walker's blanket over my knees and imagined his suitcase at the curb, 2 little sneakers peeking out like excuses. When his kids arrived, they barreled into the house with cheeks sticky from sugar and cheeks still untouched by the way adults sharpened their knives with words. They clung to me like rescue ropes. They told me, in the sincere way only children can, that their dad smelled like perfume and croissants. I kissed the tops of their heads and promised them pancakes I couldn't stand up long enough to flip. I decided then, with a steady, ridiculous tenderness, that I would give him a Christmas he'd never forget. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wanted the ledger balanced in a way that felt like truth. He returned from Paris the color of someone who thinks clothes can armor a conscience. What he found at my house would not fit in any of his photos. The door would open. The kettle would sing. And the quiet I arranged would be louder than his excuses. The first night with his kids was pure chaos. Tiny socks in my medical drawer, syrup fingers on my crutches, and laughter that didn't sound cruel for once. I hadn't planned on loving them, I only meant to keep them safe. But love slipped in like winter light under a half-closed curtain. By day 3, they were calling me Aunt May, the same way they did before my accident, before I became the family's background story. I read them bedtime tales while the smell of burnt toast hung in the air, and somewhere between their giggles and my exhaustion, an idea began to take shape. Not revenge, a correction. Their father had always treated people like props, even his kids. His Instagram was proof. Perfectly filtered smiles, designer captions, no mention of who packed the lunches or patched the scraped knees. I remembered scrolling through his feed from my hospital bed, seeing him post family first red heart hash while never once visiting me. That memory became fuel. I started making lists. Things I could fix. Things he ignored. The girls had never met their teachers properly because he was too busy. So, I went. Limping with my cane, I introduced myself as their guardian for now. The teachers looked relieved, like someone finally showed up. Their fridge was empty except for almond milk and wine, so I took them shopping. We bought flour, real fruit, even a small Christmas tree they helped decorate with paper stars. Every photo we took, I saved, not to post, but to keep. Each moment was proof that love didn't need Paris to look beautiful. Then, the night before he was supposed to return, the youngest climbed into my lap and whispered, "Dad says you're sad because you lost everything." I smiled. "No, sweetie," I said softly. "I just finally found what's worth keeping." I tucked them into bed, turned off the lights, and looked at the tiny tree glowing in the dark. Tomorrow, their father would walk into this house expecting to find a babysitter. What he'd find instead was a woman who'd quietly rewritten his entire story and changed where his children's hearts truly belonged. He arrived on Christmas Eve, exactly at 7:42 p.m., punctual only when a camera might be involved. I watched his car pull up through the frosted window, the headlights slicing through the dark like arrogance on wheels. He didn't even text first. Just waltzed in, dragging a designer suitcase and a cloud of French perfume, like the last 10 days had been an errand he'd already forgotten. "Wow," he said, glancing around. "You actually cleaned the place." I smiled, steady and slow. "We made cookies, too. The girls helped." "The girls?" He looked around. "Where are they?" Before I could answer, two small whirlwinds burst from the hallway, red cheeks, tinsel crowns, flowers still dusting their pajamas. "Dad. Look. Aunt May taught us how to make Christmas stars." They ran past him, holding paper ornaments, their laughter spilling into the room like bells. He froze. The smile on his face flickered, unsure how to fit into something genuine. "That's cute," he managed. But I could already see it, the calculation behind his eyes, the quiet jealousy of seeing love he didn't manufacture. Dinner was quiet except for the sound of forks on plates. The girls told him about the school visit, the pancake mornings, the snow angels we made in the yard. Each word was a small rebellion. He tried to laugh it off, but his hands kept tightening around his glass. "So," he said finally, forcing a smirk. "You've had fun playing house, here? Don't get too attached. They'll forget all this by next week." I looked him straight in the eye. "They might forget the details, but they won't forget who showed up." He blinked, a small, involuntary flinch. The kind of reaction people have when truth cuts cleaner than insult. That night, after the girls fell asleep, I placed a neatly wrapped envelope on the kitchen counter with his name written in silver ink. Inside it wasn't money, or gifts. It was something far heavier, the photographs, the teacher's letters, and one signed guardianship form. Tomorrow morning, he'd wake up to more than just Christmas morning. He'd wake up to the mirror version of himself, and realize just how replaceable he'd become. Morning came quiet, except for the soft thud of his suitcase rolling across the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the smell of cinnamon and paper filling the air. He looked tired, or maybe just exposed. The silver envelope still sat unopened beside his plate, its edges slightly bent where he'd gripped it too hard. "What's this?" he asked finally, voice sharp, half nervous. "Read it," I said. He tore it open, unfolding the papers with the same carelessness he gave to people. His eyes scanned the photographs first, the girls laughing in the snow, the teacher's note thanking me for attending the parent meeting, the photo of their handmade Christmas cards with "Thank you Aunt May" scribbled in red marker. Then his gaze caught the legal form. The guardianship consent, signed and notarized, giving me temporary custody in his absence, authorized by him before he left for Paris. He'd signed it so casually, not realizing it meant more than a babysitting permission slip. His signature, right there in blue ink, now looked like an admission. His jaw locked. "You tricked me." "No," I said quietly. "You gave me responsibility. I just took it seriously." He stared at me, his lips pressed into a bitter smile. "You think this means anything? You can't take my kids." "I don't need to take them," I said. "I just needed you to see that they already know who takes care of them." For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. The silence stretched between us like a wire ready to snap. The girls came running in, wearing matching sweaters we'd made together. "Merry Christmas, Daddy," they shouted, hugging his legs. He looked down, then up at me, the fight draining from his face. I rose slowly, sliding my cane beneath my hand. "Breakfast's ready," I said. "There's enough for everyone." As I turned to the stove, I caught his reflection in the kitchen window, a man suddenly small in his own story. The sound of the kettle filled the silence between us. And for the first time, it was him who didn't know what to say. He stayed longer than planned that morning, mostly pretending to scroll his phone while the girls danced around the living room. I watched him through the reflection in the window, the same way you'd watch a stranger pretending to be family. His fingers hovered over his phone camera once, then fell. No selfies this time. No captions to fake control. When I brought over the pancakes, he muttered, "You didn't have to go this far." I smiled. "Neither did you. But here we are." The girls were busy showing him the crafts we made, tiny paper angels, a clay reindeer with lopsided antlers. He stared at them for a long moment, maybe realizing how much of their childhood he'd already missed. The air felt heavy, like truth pressing on all of us. Then he said it, the line that cracked something deep in me. You really think playing mom for a week makes you special? The words hung there, cruel and trembling. I felt the familiar sting behind my ribs, the one I used to hide when I was the sister always told to be grateful. But this time, I didn't shrink. I just looked at him and said quietly, no. I think showing up makes me human. Maybe try it sometime. He stood up fast, grabbed his coat, mumbled something about needing air. I didn't stop him. The door slammed behind him like punctuation, sharp and final. The girls turned to me, wide-eyed. Is Daddy mad? The youngest asked. No, I said softly. He's just remembering something he forgot a long time ago. After they went back to playing, I walked to the counter and picked up my phone. 1 missed call from Mom. 2 from Dad. Word had spread. He must have told them I overstepped. I looked at the glowing screen, then at the pictures on the fridge, snow angels, pancakes, crooked paper stars. I pressed record and started speaking calmly, clearly. Hi Mom. Hi Dad. I just wanted to explain what really happened this week. It wasn't a defense. It was a story, and this time, it would be mine to tell. Hi Mom. Hi Dad. It's me, I began, voice steady but edged with quiet exhaustion. You've probably already heard his version. I just thought maybe, for once, you should hear mine. I looked around the kitchen, still warm from the morning, the faint smell of pancakes lingering like proof that life had happened here. The girls were in the living room drawing hearts on construction paper, their laughter like a soft metronome behind my words. When he called, I continued, I was still learning how to walk without pain. I wasn't ready to take care of anyone, but I did. I cooked, I cleaned, I held them when they cried for him. Not because I wanted credit, but because that's what love looks like when no one's watching. I paused, letting the silence fill in the spaces my family never cared to ask about. You always said he was the successful one, I whispered, but maybe success isn't measured in flights or followers. Maybe it's in showing up when it's hard. I ended the message there and sent it before I could change my mind. Then I placed the phone face down on the counter and just breathed. The door creaked an hour later. He was back, eyes red, jacket damp from snow. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, looking at the tree the girls and I decorated, the small mismatched ornaments swaying slightly when the heater kicked on. They love you, he said finally, voice low. They keep talking about you. They should, I replied gently. They're your daughters, but they're my family too. He rubbed his forehead, the arrogance gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, remorse, maybe. You sent them a message, didn't you? Yes. He nodded slowly, almost grateful for my honesty. They called me. Dad cried. I looked at him then, really looked, and realized he wasn't the enemy anymore. Just a man learning the cost of his own carelessness. I'll pick them up tomorrow, he said quietly. But maybe, we could spend Christmas dinner together. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Dinner that night was quiet, but not cold. He stayed, not out of obligation, but because leaving would have been easier than facing the truth sitting across the table. The girls had insisted we all eat together like a real family, and somehow, that simple wish built a truce neither of us had the words to propose. The table was modest. Mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and the slightly burnt pie we'd made that morning. The girls' laughter filled the gaps between our awkward silences. I poured cider into mismatched glasses, and for the first time, he didn't complain that it wasn't fancy enough. Halfway through dinner, he looked at me and said, You know, when you got hurt? I didn't visit because I didn't know what to say. I set my fork down. Silence still says something, you know. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. Yeah. It says I didn't care enough to try. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. And in our family, close was rare enough to count. After the dishes were cleared, the girls begged for one more Christmas story. I told them about a woman who once lost everything, her health, her family's respect, her place in the world, and how she rebuilt it quietly, with small acts of love no one noticed until they did. When I finished, the youngest looked up at her dad. "That's Aunt May, right?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think it is." As they drifted off to sleep on the couch, he helped me clean up, wordlessly, gently. When the last dish was washed, he leaned against the counter and said, "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I looked at him, calm and tired. "I didn't get stronger," I said. "I just stopped waiting for anyone else to see me." He stared at me for a long time, then nodded once, not defensive, not dismissive. Just quiet understanding. And for the first time since my accident, the silence between us didn't feel like a wound. It felt like peace trying to return home. The next morning, the world outside was white, soft snow covering the driveway, smoothing over every footprint from the night before. I stood by the window with a mug of coffee, the steam tracing invisible shapes against the glass. The girls were still asleep on the couch, tangled in blankets and dreams. He walked in quietly, coat in hand, eyes softer than I remembered. "I should get them home before the roads freeze," he said. His voice wasn't cold, just careful. I nodded. "They packed their gifts. And their drawings for you." He smiled, almost shy. "They said they want to visit again next week." That simple sentence carried more healing than all the apologies in the world. Before he left, he turned back. "You know, Maya, Paris wasn't worth it. Not compared to this." I didn't respond. Some truths are better left hanging in the quiet where they belong. He knelt, kissed the girls' foreheads, then straightened. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" I asked. "For showing me how much I've been missing." I walked them to the door, watched his car disappear into the white morning. The silence afterward felt vast, but not empty. It was a silence I owned. I turned back inside, to the tree still blinking in the corner, to the empty mugs and flower-stained table. Every trace of chaos they'd left behind felt like proof, of survival, of growth, of love unadvertised. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Dad. "Your brother told us everything. We're proud of you. Come home for New Year's dinner." I smiled, a slow, private kind of smile that only comes when life finally evens its balance sheet. I replied, "Maybe. Let's start with forgiveness first." Then I shut off my phone, opened the window, and let the cold air wash over the quiet house. Outside, snow kept falling, soft, endless, honest. For the first time since the accident, I felt whole. Not because they'd finally seen me, but because I no longer needed them to.